This is the final session of the Principles series with a focus on mathematics. Today's session is really, I've designed it to be a lot of reflective practice as well as planning time. And the reason for that is we're all coming at instructional coaching from very different places. Some of you are coaches. Some of you are principals who want coaches. Some of you are principals who have coaches but don't know what to do with them. Some of you might be other administrators that want to bring in coaching but doesn't know who should these people be. How do we make this coaching work? And quite honestly, what we're finding across the state is that coaches have kind of become a dumping ground. So many of our coaches are not actually doing the work of the coach. They're facilitating all these other roles that are going on. And that's really undermining the professional learning that can occur for your staff if you are fortunate enough to have coaches. So that's kind of what today's focus is going to be on. So in order to really facilitate and have coaches in your building, one of the first pieces of information is you have to make sure that the culture in your building supports coaching. That is not only the supports for the coach themselves, but the supports for the teachers to be open and willing to have a coach. We're going to talk about what makes a high quality coach. Now, some of you are like, well, I already have a coach and they don't really have all these qualities, but this is who I have. That's fine. Now you have a different responsibility. How do we build those qualities in our coaches? Or perhaps you're in a position where your district is heading towards that idea of coaching, and maybe you are on the selection committee and things like that. And then how do you establish an effective student-focused coaching model? The reality is that coaching in and of itself is really focused on teacher practice, but that teacher practice should be based upon evidence of what the students are doing, because that is our ultimate goal, is student achievement. So what I'd like to do, don't use this code, but if you have a device, if you can go to mentimeter.com, the code will come up in 1 second, and use code 4761. What I'd like for you to just type in is, when I hear coaching, what comes to your mind? When I think of coaching, what comes to mind? So as people are finishing up putting in the words that come to mind when they think of coaching, obviously this is creating a word cloud where the larger the word, the more votes, if you will. So support is a big one that comes out. Collaboration. Resource. Very often we don't think of people as being a resource, but they are in fact probably our most valuable resource that we have. Some of the other ones that are a little bit different here that I like, differentiated. Just like with children, one size doesn't fit all. Your coaching is not a one size fits all process. Strategic practices, content expert, professional development. So there's a lot of things that come to mind when we think of a coach, and many of us are in a position where there's one human being servicing this role, and in many cases for multiple schools within a district. Okay, so all you principals out there that think you have it tough, at least you're in one building, right? All right, so we'll go back to the presentation now, but I wanted just to kind of make sure that we set the frame of reference in terms of when you think about coaching, what exactly comes to mind, because I think that sets the tone for the day. Coaching is relatively a new thing in education. I don't know that it's all that new as much as we've put a name to it compared to years ago. But I want to talk a little bit about the research behind coaching and why it is that we coach, and why do we need coaching now where years ago we didn't hear about this as much. You know, we think of the little one-room schoolhouses and they didn't have to worry about coaches. So way back in the beginning of time in education, schools were never intended to educate large numbers of students at a high level. Okay, when you think about it, education, historically in our nation and certainly in other nations, it was an elitist thing. You got educated if you were in a certain class of people. As a matter of fact, in 1893, less than 3% of American students graduated from high school. Many of them went to work on their family farms, in the factories, whatever that was to support. And even as late as 1950, the majority of students were still dropping out of high school. Fast forward to today, all students must master that rigorous content. We have, I don't have the exact number, but we're somewhere around a 90% graduation rate now. That's pretty high compared to less than 50% really just, 60 years ago or so? So when we are trying to now have all students achieve this, the needs of the students are much more diverse, which means the skill set of the teacher must also be diverse. The number one indicator of student success through research is teacher quality. As a matter of fact, there is even some research to support that if you do not have home support, but you have a quality teacher, your students can succeed. That's a really tough pill to swallow for some people because it's really easy not to blame us, right? So it is without question the number one indicator. As a matter of fact, John Hattie did some research. This was in 2003. He's actually updated this more recently. More so, he added more indicators within each subcategory. So the factors that affect educational outcomes, if you look at this chart, the biggest pie is student characteristics and prior attainment. That does encompass some of that home stuff. It does encompass some ability. It does encompass students' perceptions of what they can do, kind of that growth mindset piece. That's the biggest chunk of the pie, which makes sense. But look at the next biggest chunk, which accounts for almost 25% of effectiveness, teacher quality. Or teacher effectiveness in this case. What happens, however, repeatedly is our teachers go to their teacher prep programs, then we do our student teaching, and then we go into a classroom. Now, I don't know about all of you who that first week or so in your classroom, how you felt, but it's like shell shock, right? Like, what do you mean I don't have someone to help support me, right here, right now? Where's the copy machine? When can I use the bathroom? I have to, what's the fire drill procedure? All those little things. And then while you're trying to figure out all that admin stuff, oh yeah, and teach the kids this curriculum too. So in Connecticut, we have a pretty rigorous, teacher indoctrination program, started with BEST, turned to TEAM, things like that, to provide those supports. Some districts have their own systems and structures in place to support. But the reality is that day-to-day classroom support is missing in many cases. And while I just recently talked about new teachers, the reality is that veteran teachers sometimes need that support too. Because A, standards have changed. Teaching philosophies through research have changed. You can't be using the mimeograph worksheet that you did years ago. And if you have teachers who are just going to their binder and blowing the dust off of it and pulling something, they need some supports. Because that means they're not growing as a teacher, and if they're not growing as a teacher, how effective are they to help their students grow? So, most school systems spend all their money on programs and systems and all these things to get kids to succeed, right? It's what's the latest and greatest that research says. But where has it gotten us? Not very far. If you do a cost analysis and think about spending some of your dollars on coaches as opposed to programs, there's a cost analysis that you get more bang for your buck. That's a tough pill to swallow because it's less tangible. It's much more difficult to be able to say to a board of education, I need people to do this work and I can make my resources. They're like, oh, it's 5 years, we need a new textbook, right? Like that's the rotation that we do. So we want to think about that. In the state of Connecticut, back several years ago, there was a math science partnership grant focused on instructional coaching. And specifically related to math, the question was asked, how often do you have professional learning in mathematics? Look at the results. Seldom is the biggest piece of the pie. The next biggest is only sometimes. Now, I'd be very curious to ask that same question and say, how many of you get professional learning on reading or ELA? And I'm guessing that the majority would be blue, okay? Particularly at our elementary school level. Why that is, I don't know. I can only assume. But this is a problem when our number one indicator of success is teacher effectiveness, but we're not providing professional learning for our teachers to be successful in mathematics. That's a problem. And that's where coaching comes in. There's 5 principles of effective professional learning. So we're all kind of aware at this point that things like we're doing today, the one and dones, really are not the most beneficial for professional learning. Specifically, it has to be, the duration of it has to be significant and ongoing. It is no different than when we teach a kid a new concept. We don't want our teachers to say, okay, boys and girls, today we're on page 5. You got that because tomorrow we're going on page 6. But we do it with teachers all the time. We don't give them time to actually develop the skill or to practice the skill and get feedback on that. While they're implementing, there needs to be support for that teacher. Change is hard. It's very uncomfortable. It's that, pit in your stomach that you feel when you're trying something new and what if I fail? That's a very difficult position to be in, and I would go out on a limb and say teachers, because of our nature of being responsible for children, putting ourselves out there, I think hits us harder than it does maybe in other professions. Teachers' initial exposure to the concept shouldn't be passive. They should be engaged in it. Okay? They shouldn't be sitting in a room listening to how you do something. They should be watching it, modeling it. Modeling is effective because what does it look like? I can listen to the words and I can read the books, but what does that look like in practice? I need to see it to understand it better. And it shouldn't be generic. I can't tell you how many times I sat through election day professional development and learned about the greatest strategy, and every example that was used was in the humanities. And then, God forbid, you ask the question, how can I do this in math? You want to see a facilitator sweat bullets? Ask that question. Okay? So all of that professional learning time that my district was responsible for providing to me, in many cases, was meaningless because it wasn't something that I could bring back and try in my own classroom. I was fortunate enough that I had an administrator who provided an opportunity for some in-depth professional learning. It was on a Saturday. We voluntarily went. It wasn't paid for. It was probably the best that I did because it challenged my own content knowledge as well as presented what I was actually teaching in my classroom in the moment. The theory behind coaching is that if you have a traditional professional learning, the one and done and all of that, there is only a 10% implementation rate from the learning that comes out of that. If you have instructional coaches that are providing that professional learning, showing new strategies, helping understand content, the implementation rate jumps to 85%. If you have an 85% implementation rate, you can determine whether or not it's effective or not and having an impact on kids. If you only have a 10% implementation rate, you really don't have enough data to determine that. So what do districts do? They toss out that program and get something new 2 years later, right? That didn't work. Well, it didn't work not because it's not a good program. It didn't work because it wasn't implemented with fidelity, because teachers didn't know how to do it and they weren't coached through it. But you can't coach without a collaborative culture. The most effective schools, or if you're in a high school, the most effective departments are those that have a collaborative professional learning community. I was incredibly fortunate in the district that I came from. We had, during the bulk of my career, 3 middle schools. We not only met as grade level math teachers, we met as vertical teams within the school, and we met outside of the school on a regular basis. And I will tell you that the math department in this district made gains in kids because there was an established collaborative culture. And I would talk to my colleagues in other disciplines that didn't have those in place, and they did not feel that they were doing what was best for kids. So, why should we collaborate? There's gains in student achievement. If you collaborate, and I'm not saying we have to do everything exactly the same, but if the through line is similar, we can really start to make decisions about what's working for our kids and what's not. You get higher quality solutions to problems. I can come up with a solution to a problem, you can come up with a solution to a problem, and you can come up with a solution to a problem. But if we bring all of our solutions together, we're probably going to come up with the best solution. Because I'm going to miss thinking about something, or I'm not going to factor in something. Increase confidence among the staff. If I know that we're all in this together, makes it a lot easier to try something new. Teachers are able to support one another's strengths, support their strengths and accommodate weaknesses. Every teacher in your building is strong in something and needs help in something. Okay, that's just the nature of the beast. That's us as human beings. So when you capitalize on each individual's strength, you naturally will be supporting someone else's area of weakness. Test new ideas. Support new teachers. I just was on a call yesterday, and nationally, fewer and fewer individuals are going into education in college. So forget about the shortage of math, which is astronomical. Education as a whole, we are losing teachers to this profession. We aren't even getting them to come. And expanded pools of ideas, materials, and methods. What's more efficient? Collaborating where you know you have a unit coming up. You know what? I'm going to go do some research and see what's out here for this. You work on this part. We'll come together. We'll share. As opposed to one teacher doing it all. There's no time for that in the school day. We know that. So, our first activity of the day, I was chuckling. I've tried to make all of these sessions with various activities so it's not a complete stand and deliver. And a colleague of mine went to something yesterday that was pretty much stand and deliver, and she was like, I thought of you because I know you always have activities. So I found this framework for assessing teacher collaboration from the National Center on Time and Learning. And as I mentioned at the beginning of today's presentation, I'm really trying to make today about reflective practice so you understand where am I and where do I want to go with this. So the first thing is assessing how you feel teacher collaboration is in your fill in the blank. If you're a principal in your school, if you're a district administrator in your district, if you're a district administrator who works maybe with a cohort of schools in that cohort, and just think about where do you fall on this continuum. So what you'll see here is the key principles of collaboration. What would it look like if there's strong implementation? What does it look like in weak implementation? And where do you think you fit? This is non-judgmental. I'm not going to go look around and be like, oh, that's not so good. This is your way. You have to know your starting point. So I encourage you to really think about this and to be very honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself, it's like the teachers that always say, oh no, I have that. And you're like, you do? So please take a few minutes. It's a front and back sheet. I also encourage you, if you are an administrator who happens to be here with your coach, to compare. Because again, sometimes perceptions are very different depending upon your lens. So use that as another reflective tool. This is what I think, but this is where my coach thinks. My guess is you're somewhere in the middle. Okay, so if I can bring you all together, I'm hearing more chatter, which usually means that we're ending the activity and that people are ready to move on. So now that you have a sense of what you believe your collaborative culture is in your school, we need to start understanding what is this thing we call coaching. An instructional coach can be considered on-site professional development. Okay? Think about how much you would pay to have on-site PD every day of your school year. Or maybe not so much how much you would pay, think about how much that would cost. But that's what we do with our coaches. We say that that's what they are. So, there are certain characteristics of coaches, and in your folders on the resource side, I have a sheet that expands upon this. Coaches have to believe in a growth mindset. Coaches have to believe that their work with teachers are going to improve teacher practice. Okay? If they don't believe that, oh, there's nothing we can do with that teacher, forget it. That's not going to really help. They have to have teaching expertise. Teaching expertise, notice it doesn't say content, it doesn't say pedagogical, because it's teaching. It's a combination of that. You can know your content like the back of your hand, but do you know how to teach it? It's no different than some of our great athletes who retire out of their sport and then decide to go become a coach and don't really find much success because they knew how to play the game. They don't know how to coach the game. They have to possess strong coaching skills. There is a skill set for coaching. How many of you have children who play youth sports? How many of your children have had some really good coaches? How many have had some really bad coaches? Okay? So there is a skill set to coaching. The difference here is that these people are being paid to do the job, as opposed to our youth sports where they're volunteers. So we need to make sure that they have the appropriate skills to be effective. They have to have strong relationship skills, because when you're a coach, very often you're going to have some really difficult conversations with your teachers. Principals know this really well. Principals are in an evaluative role, but there are still times that you have to have a really difficult conversation with your staff. If you've built a solid relationship, that conversation becomes more palatable for everyone involved. You do have to have content expertise. You have to know what are the latest strategies and effective teaching practices around my content. You have to know, what is my content? What are the standards? And then you have to have a strong leader, because they need to be able to go in and have credibility with the staff. I know what I'm doing and I am here to help you, and I am right now perhaps your most valuable resource. They have to believe that, and that's what a strong leader would do. If we're talking about specifically a math instructional coach, obviously it goes without saying they have to have knowledge of math. But that knowledge of math needs to go beyond a specific grade level. They need to really understand the continuum of math education and why things are done the way that they are. They need to know the students. That's what makes instructional coaching more valuable than bringing in a facilitator. Who knows your students better than your teachers? As a matter of fact, and I'm going to pick on New Britain because I know they're here, there's at least two different schools represented. Even though they're both from New Britain, the students at one school, their needs, their dynamic is different than the other school. And no one knows that better than the teachers and the principal in those buildings. They need to have knowledge of instructional practices. What are effective teaching practices that enable students to not only learn, but retain the information? Okay, back when many of us learned mathematics, we did a lot of memorizing for the moment. And then, phew, that test is over and out it went. We didn't retain it. And then they need to have knowledge of how you lead change and how you deal with adult learners. You can't use the same strategies that you use with your little elementary school kids with adult learners. Middle school, I'd beg to differ. I think you can use a lot of those strategies because middle school is an interesting beast. But you have to know how adults learn so that way you can teach or model or coach to those strengths. So, at the tables, and you know I hesitated putting them in the front because I knew no one was going to sit in the front. Thank you for taking a front row seat. There is a folder or an envelope, and within that envelope there's little pieces of paper. And what I would like for you to do is I would like you to sort them. The colors mean nothing. I had grandiose plans of only putting one color in, and then it just didn't work so well. So the colors really is just, I did it right after Easter, so they're very pastel-y. So what you're going to do is you're going to sort all of these statements into two columns. This is a coach. This is not a coach. Okay, it looks as though like most people have done their sort. Although looking around, I am finding it interesting that there's also many people who made 3 columns. The is not, and the I'm not so sure where this one goes, right? So let's take a look at what coaching is and what coaching is not. Because this is something that I think gets very, very blurry. I know this is small, so I'm going to read through it. So if we're talking about a coach, they are a colleague who observes teachers and offers feedback to improve learning. They are not an administrator who evaluates teachers. And as administrators, you are doing a disservice if you are trying to get the inside scoop of your teachers through your coaches, because you are undermining the relationship building that occurs with the teachers and the coach. It needs to be a safe area, and if that teacher thinks what's going to happen when they're coaching me is they're going to go report back to my administrator, they're not going to be able to be effective. A coach is a colleague who co-plans with a teacher, not a colleague who plans for the teacher. Very, very different. Okay? Your coach should not be like, okay, here's a great lesson, go teach it. No, let's talk together. What's making this a good lesson? What do you think about this? What about this activity? Are your kids ready for it? What prerequisite skills do they need? All of that thinking. A coach is a colleague who co-teaches or models a strategy. A coach is not a colleague who teaches a lesson without the teacher present. They are not your building sub. And if you are utilizing them as your building sub, you are not effectively utilizing your coaches. And it happens more often than not. A coach is a colleague who provides resources to teachers, not a colleague who makes the copies. Okay? They are not your support staff. They are the person who should be given and afforded the time to look for resources that are going to be effective in your classrooms. The elementary schools, many of us have certain programs or things that we've bought into. There's no one perfect model. The coach can be that person who looks for the really good stuff to help support it. But not the coach who says, oh, you need 20 copies of that for your next class? Sure, let me go. I'll go run those for you. Okay? A coach is a colleague who listens and remains confidential, not one who reports confidential conversations to the office. That goes back to that idea of trust. Okay? Maybe there's a teacher and they're coaching and they talk about a particular skill that they know they're really struggling with. Or maybe there's something going on in their personal life that day that affected what they did in the class when the coach observed. A coach is a colleague who makes suggestions to improve instruction. They are not telling them what to do, they're making suggestions because teachers need to have that autonomy. They are not someone who teaches small groups or classes. I had this conversation with a group in the back kind of as we were talking. In too many of our buildings, coaches and interventionists are one and the same. If you're a coach, you are about teacher learning. If you are an interventionist, you are about student learning. Okay? Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all about student learning, but the focus of how you get to that student learning depends on the lens of either intervention or coaching. And very often, because we don't have enough interventionists, because we don't have enough coaches, we just have them do it all. And what happens when we try to do it all? We do none of it really great, right? A coach is a colleague who assists teachers in looking at ways to use data and drive instruction. They are not a data analyst. They are looking at data with the teachers. What does this data say about what our kids are learning? What are their areas of weakness? What can we do to make that better? How do I look at data? What is that data telling us? Many of you have more data than you know what to do with in your buildings. Right? We are so data-driven in Connecticut, but in most cases, that data is not doing much to drive instruction. That's a problem. So really thinking about what data is most effective and why.
So I have a question. Well, I'll let you finish and then I just have some questions.
Okay. A coach is a colleague who handles classroom discipline during co-teaching and modeling. They are not a semi-administrator who monitors students sent to the office for discipline reasons. If you have a coach and there is a problem going on in the classroom, as a certified teacher in your building, they better step up. And quite honestly, in some cases, that classroom management piece might be what the teacher needs to be coached in. That's one of the hardest things to learn, I think, as a new teacher particularly. And those of us that, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but we're skilled enough that you had the classroom management, what happened? You always got that class because you could handle it, right? So we have to be really careful about that. But they shouldn't be, this kid, I had to write this kid up and send him to the office, so can you escort him to the office and take care of that? No, that's not the coach's responsibility. A coach is a colleague who facilitates professional development or provides training for staff. Utilize the expertise of your coaches. In some school districts, and again I'm going to use my, the election day professional learning, In many school districts, the principals have to come up with the professional learning for that day for their building. Principals, don't do that to yourselves, especially if you're an elementary school principal and you want to do content. My guess is many of you are not content experts in every area. So utilize instructional coaches to do that professional learning. They have the knowledge. They have the leadership skills. Utilize it. They are not a colleague who administers individual student assessments such as benchmarks. Oh, I got to get through these benchmarks. Oh, we'll use the coach. He'll get them through for you. No, it's about being and improving teachers. A coach is a colleague who covers classes so a teacher can observe another teacher for short periods of time. They are not a substitute teacher. Okay, that's a really fine line because it sounds like they're subbing, but they're subbing with a purpose. We learn, that goes back to the strengths and weaknesses. If you know a teacher has a certain strength and a teacher needs help in that, instead of you trying to explain it, you know what, I'm gonna come cover your class. I want you to go watch John next door and see how he handles that. Okay? So it's not always the coach that has to do the modeling. Sometimes you're utilizing your other staff for modeling. And a coach is not a paraprofessional. They're not in there to service students with 504s or IEPs and provide assistance. They're there to assist and support the teacher. So there is a continuum of coaching. This continuum of coaching, I want you to really think about in terms of where are my teachers? Oh, you had a question. Go ahead.
I did have a question about some of the, I guess, the ones that I got wrong.
It's how we learn. It's okay.
A data analyst. Now, I felt that this is the duty of the coach because in order to to be a colleague who assists teachers in looking at ways to use data to drive instruction, they first would need to be able to analyze and already have answers in their head as to what direction this should be going. So that is why
and I certainly can certainly see that. I think what the difference was trying to be portrayed here is that they are the sole person doing your data analysis, as opposed to getting a foundation so that they can have a collaborative conversation around the data.
Okay. And then the other, a colleague who covers classes so a teacher can observe another teacher for a short period of time. I put that in the, is not what a coach does because my feeling is that coaches should go along with a teacher to make these.
And I agree. In an ideal world, absolutely. The problem is that some structures don't allow for that because of sub-coverage. So if they can't go with them, which would be the ideal, then to use them for a short period of time. And again, if you're being used for a short period of time for an observation, the intended follow-up on that is we have a conversation about what you saw and what you learned from that. It's not like, okay, go look and now you got it, good, I'm out. That's not what it's about. But yes, I agree with you. In the perfect world, they go together, but that doesn't always work.
And a colleague who teaches small groups or classes. I felt a coach should be doing small group instruction in a classroom. So that is a no?
That's a no, because it should, the coach again, in this definition of instructional coaching, it's about supporting the teacher in that. So if they're teaching a small group because they're modeling something for the teacher, or you want to model the process, and so part of that is small group instruction, that's fine. What this was more speaking to was I'm going to pull a group of students and offer them individual help while I'm in the classroom just to kind of help the teacher out. Again, if the teacher doesn't have that coach all the time, they need to learn how to facilitate that themselves. So how does the coach support that? Okay?
So I'm going to stop that.
But again, it's really difficult because if you don't have interventions, Obviously, you're going to take someone who's skilled and put them in that role. So I'm not saying that this is, taboo, like that's the worst thing you can do. But it's recognizing that if that's what they're servicing, is there a way that I can get interventionists into my building? Is there a way that I can structure my SRBI services to do that? And I know I'm talking through, rose-colored lenses right now because you guys are like, we have no money to do any of this stuff. But that's where we want to go. So besides your coaches having a skill set, your teachers really are in different places in terms of their readiness to be able to accept coaching. So if we think of this continuum or stances of interaction, on the far end we have the administrator, which many of you are in here. You are the evaluator. You are the person who tells the teacher what their issues are, right? Like, no, you are not doing this right. You, very often, are the person who comes up with the solution. As a result of this, you're going to start doing this. Okay? It's a very directed approach. As we move over, mentoring kind of goes in the middle. If you're consulting as a mentor, the teacher doesn't have the knowledge. They can't really see their own problems. Like, they might know something's up, but they're not sure what exactly it is. They can't identify it. And they lack the assessment of students themselves. They don't know how to evaluate things. So they consult with you to try to have you, a consultant kind of gives a firm direction without being, I'm going to call the principals, this is not intended to be mean in any way, but the dictator, right? It's the principal. You have the right to say, hey, you're going to do it my way because I'm in charge of the school. And I need to make sure I'm doing what's best for the students in this building. As a consultant, you're kind of directing them to a way, but they have a little bit of leeway. Then there's a bridge between consulting and coaching. So when we're talking about that, the teacher wants to make a change, but maybe fears making those mistakes. That's that gut feeling again. The teacher is in need of a friend for his or her own growth. Sometimes teaching feels like you're on an island. So they need someone to kind of support them in that thinking. Both the teacher and the coach own a piece of it. But the teacher doesn't know what's causing certain things to happen. That's why they need the coach there to kind of figure out, like, can you come look at what's going on? What's happening here? And then the ultimate goal to get to coaching is the teacher identifies, I need help with this. This is what I need you to coach me with. The teacher is wanting to learn new strategies, not being told they have to. The teacher wants to do that. Okay, that is your most ready teacher. And the teacher is concerned about meeting the various needs of his or her students. That might mean they're willing to give up some of what they've done in the past. That's a hard thing for teachers to do. So this is kind of that continuum of how ready are your teachers to accept coaching. Because if they're not ready to accept coaching, I wouldn't put a coach with them. I think as an administrator, that still becomes your role then to get them along that continuum. The time that a coach has to make change is very limited. So if they're working with teachers who are not ready to accept the coaching model, that time is not going to be well spent. So we want to be very careful of that. And there's a growth continuum along this. The further we get to coaching, the bigger the growth is. Okay? Because we know when we're told to do something, sometimes we want to kind of dig in our heels a little bit and we don't grow as much. So the administrators tell people what to do, they solve the problems for them. That's why they're the administrators. Because guess what? If they don't do this, it falls on them. When we get to mentoring, they give advice, they offer guidance, it's collegial. When you get to coaching, you're asking questions and having difficult conversations in order to help someone else solve their own problem. What do you think went well in that class? I noticed this. How could you fix that? What might you try next time? Okay? So that's kind of that continuum from being an evaluator to being a coach.
You feel as an administrator you can wear multiple hats within that continuum?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's not like you sit in this one.
Absolutely.
You can't go into that. Because
Yes.
I think as part of administration, you have to be able to.
And I think the key is when you're thinking of your coaches in your building, they should only be in here.
Yes.
Too many people are using them here. And if your coaches have an evaluative nature to them, they are not going to be effective with teachers. So yes, an administrator is going to go the gamut, and I would say go the gamut with all teachers throughout the year. A coach needs to stay in that mentoring and coach role. So let's talk about student-centered versus teacher-centered coaching, because I've said a lot about coaching is about the teacher and supporting the teacher, but it's supporting the teacher for student success, which is why it's actually called student-centered focus. So again, here's kind of a continuum. Student-centered coaching is focusing on the data to improve instruction. So that's what you were saying. Like, they need to know what is that data saying so we can actually improve. Student-centered coaching is the district curricula and programs are viewed as tools. So they're not the end-all be-all. Okay, that's important to know. In student-centered coaching, there is trusting, respectful, and collegial relationships. Okay, I have to trust what the coach is saying to me, and I have to be able to be honest with the coach and not be fearful of that. And then the coach is viewed as a partner. They're not viewed as someone who's coming into my room telling me what to do. They're viewed as a partner in the learning process of the students. In teacher-centered coaching, the focus is what the teacher is or is not doing. They implement a specific program as the primary objective. You still need a trusting relationship, but the coach is viewed as the person who holds the teacher accountable. The teachers need to hold themselves accountable. Okay, so that's what we don't like about that. And then relationship-driven coaching, which sometimes is how it starts out. If you have a teacher who's like, I'm not so sure about this whole coaching thing, sometimes you have to do a baby step. And you have relationship-driven coaching, where it's on providing support in a way that doesn't challenge or threaten. If you're doing true student-centered coaching, your coaches are challenging your teachers regularly. Some teachers aren't ready for that challenge. District curricular programs are part of the conversation and shared as possible resources. There's congenial relationships as opposed to true collaboration. And the coach is viewed as a friendly source of support. It's like, hey, we're going to play in the sandbox together. This is fun. Okay, but there's not a lot of impact on that type of coaching. But the idea behind why that coaching exists is to hopefully build up to the point where you can start having those difficult conversations. So we're going to talk about whether or not your coaches coach heavy or coach light. Coaching heavy, the goal is to improve teaching and learning. In coaching light, they just want to be appreciated. Now, we know everyone wants to be appreciated, like that's just human nature, but that can't be your goal, end-all be-all goal. Coaching heavy is a focus on planning powerful instruction. Coaching light is a focus on building and maintaining relationships. I want them to like me. Coaching heavy includes curriculum analysis, data analysis, and instructional practice. Coaching light provides resources and avoids difficult conversations. Coaching heavy, teachers engage in collaboration. Coaching light, they just feel supported. Okay? There's a big difference between collaboration and support. And then coaching heavy, feedback is around student learning results, where coaching light, feedback is around teacher behavior. Okay? So, again, I know there's some coaches in the room and there's also some administrators. So in this activity 3 where it says you, if you're a coach, you can keep it a you. If you're an administrator, change it to does your coach, blah, 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 blah. And again, for those of you that are in a team where you have both, I would do it independently and then compare and see if you feel the same way in terms of coaching heavy or light. Okay, so hopefully you've learned a little bit about whether or not your coaches are coaching heavy and light. My understanding is in the back of the room there's a little bit of disagreement about that. But I think that the point here is that coaching heavy is not easy for anyone to do. And you really need to have the structures and supports in place in your school building. And the principals that are here really are the person who can ensure that those structures and supports are in place. So, what are the coaching roles? There's a lot of them. So we're going to go through them and discuss them. First of all, as a principal, for those principals out there, you have a role in coaching. Okay? And it's not just hiring and scheduling. To visibly honor the purpose of coaching and create the structures to support that. Okay? So there needs to be evidence in your work that the teachers and the coaches know that you support this idea of coaching. You need to build a culture of learning throughout the school. We think of schools as places where our students learn. Schools should also be places where our teachers learn, where our administrators learn. Okay? We don't stop learning. I think when you're talking with a group of educators, we get that more than anyone, but that learning process doesn't stop. To navigate the complexities of adult learning, as an administrator in your training, there are certain things that you go through that a teacher doesn't go through about adult learners and how to manage adult people. How do you help your coach figure that out? To hold teachers accountable for decisions made between teachers and coaches. If the teacher and coach decides on something, you need to support that accountability and be following up on that. And it's not a, I told them to do this, oh, they didn't do that. It's not like a, bad cop, good cop with mom and dad type of thing. This is about, okay, this is your plan. Are you following through on this plan? Because if not, we need to figure out what else can be done. And to support the professional learning of coaches. Now, this is one I caution you a little bit on. What I find very often is when the state had money and we were actually doing professional learning in mathematics, I was seeing the same people there. And it was many of your coaches. They're fabulous people. But 90% of what I was training on, they didn't need. So I would say support selective professional learning of your coaches. Make sure that they're getting the professional learning that they need to be successful in their role as a coach. If you are sending your coach to a content PD because they're the math coach, so we're going to go there, but they already have it, that's a waste of their time. And they could be supporting a teacher in that. Okay? That might be one of those instances where if there's a particular content problem, maybe the coach goes with the teacher who's really experiencing that problem and getting your teachers to hear it from another source, particularly your most resistant teachers. Okay? Most of you principals who have teachers who have longevity with you know that it's really sometimes, like I say the same thing over and over, and what happens? It's no different than our children. My son never puts away his water bottle in our living room. Every morning I go downstairs, there's at least one, usually there's 3 or 4, every day for the last probably 5 years. Every day, please put your water bottle away. Goes in one ear, goes right out the other. Someone else can come into our home, say the same thing, that water bottle's put away in a heartbeat. That's the same thing that happens in schools, right? Sometimes when you hear that outsider say it, You're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And the principal's like bashing their head going, oh my God, that's what I've been telling you for the last 3 years. Why now, right? So really think about, what is the professional learning? Is it about understanding how to work with adult learners? Is it professional learning on how do you navigate a difficult conversation? Okay, there's learning about that. Is it learning about how do you do coaching? What does the cycle look like? Okay, so think about the professional learning of your coaches. As much as they are the facilitators of professional learning, they also need it. So these are all the different roles that a coach may take on. Okay, remember, we're talking about one human being. So we're going to go through each of these. The first role, and your coaches will move in and out of these roles regularly. This is also another way in which you can think about the professional learning of your coach. Which of these roles do they have like the skill set for, and which do they need a little bit of help with? So first is a data coach. Looking at the student data to address the needs, facilitate teachers' understanding of the data. Are they able to help the teachers see those connections? Help the teachers make curriculum decisions based upon the data. Okay, so sometimes, too often, we're just worrying about planning that next unit. But what is the data telling us where we're at? Do we do any sort of prerequisite check to see where we might need to go back? And creates a blame-free environment. I think blame-free is really hard in education. And I've shared this before. I started at the high school. I went to the middle school because middle school teachers had no idea what they were doing. So I had to go fix them. And then I taught in the middle school and I realized it wasn't the middle school teacher's problem, it was the elementary school teacher's fault. Right? Because we always want to blame someone because it's really hard to blame ourselves. A resource provider. When I taught in the middle school, I had a planning period of one class period. It was like a 45-minute planning period. And in 45 minutes, I needed to make sure that I got through any correcting, lesson planning, copying. If I was fortunate, I might be able to use the restroom, take parent phone calls, respond to emails, all in 45 minutes. Time is valuable. I did not have time to be able to go through all the different resources and websites that are valuable and find out what's going to be good for my upcoming lesson. Now, I know every teacher doesn't plan just in those 45 minutes. Most of them are planning into the wee hours of the morning, and that's what I did too. But when you think about it, if we have an individual in our building who can do some of that legwork because they don't have the responsibility at that particular moment in time to be in front of a group of students, what a great tool. Identifies resources to meet the needs of all learners. We know we have an achievement gap. We know we have difficulty with our special education population. We know we have difficulty with our Ls. If you are in a district that has a high L population, is your coach able to make sure that they're providing resources to support the instruction of your L students on grade level? On grade level. I went into a classroom and did an observation, and there were L students. I think it was like a 5th grade classroom. They, no lie, on the computer they were doing 1-digit addition. That is not grade level work. Why is that? Because they can't speak the language? And then provides models to support lesson and unit planning. Okay, planning is a key to education. We all know that, but there's never enough time for it. So if your coach can help facilitate the thinking process of good unit and lesson planning, that backwards design, things like that, that's how they can be a resource. Your coach can also be a mentor. They serve the needs of new teachers. Okay, they can become that person that, oh, you need to find out where the toner's kept? Here you go, right? Some of those little things so that the teacher feels well. Acclimates teachers to professional norms, practices, and policies. Okay, that's really hard. And it doesn't matter if you've been teaching for a lot of years. If you go to a different school or a different district, everything's completely different. I have to fill out what form for what. Provides advice to develop capacity to make decisions and understands the stages of teacher development. Okay, just like student development, teachers go through a developmental process as well. I think I'm still going through the process. Your coach should be a curriculum specialist. This is one of the keys to coaching. They have to focus on the what of the teaching. Are we teaching, and this goes back to our very first session together on focus on the content, do they know what the grade level should be teaching? They understand the curriculum pacing, scope, and sequence. They have to be able to understand that, because if a teacher starts getting bogged down in something, they need to support the teacher in how to make decisions to combine material or facilitate the learning of the standards in a different way to catch up, so that way we have all the standards covered. They should be able to deepen the teacher's content knowledge. They should be the ones that are working with the teachers. I'm going to use fractions because, as you know, it's one of my favorites. Do your teachers really understand the conceptual understanding behind fractions? And if not, if the coach has strong content knowledge as the curriculum specialist, they develop that in the teacher so that the teacher feels comfortable teaching that content to kids. That's particularly important nowadays in upper elementary school, and identifies what successful learning looks like. How do you know if your students are actually doing it? You don't want how you know to be driven by that test that's given at the end of the unit. You want to know how formatively are you learning about what your kids know throughout the process, so that you can support the teacher in making adjustments. As a result of that, they also become the instructional specialist. So not only do they know what to teach, they know how to teach it. They choose appropriate instructional strategies aligned with curriculum content. We talked about this both in the content and in the practice standards. Certain standards call for certain types of instruction. Your instructional specialist, your coach, should know that material. Supports teachers in creating a safe and productive learning environment. If you have a teacher who for years, and high school teachers are infamous for this, you come in, I got nice, neat rows. And now you're saying to your teachers, well, we want to do group work. That's panic. I will never, ever forget the first time I had to co-teach. My co-teaching partner, we got along fabulously, but we were completely different personalities. I am very rigid and very organized, and I like things to have a place. That's me. I'm very type A. She's more carefree, so she likes stuff everywhere. And she decided that we were going to do this project, and my room looked like a war zone. There was stuff everywhere. And I was like, sick to my stomach, but the kids loved it and were learning. That's what this is. It's creating that safe and productive learning environment, trying something different and knowing it will be okay. And then assist teachers in establishing classroom routines. When we want them to start doing more, whether we're talking about number talks or think, pair, share types of routines, all those different things, those math discourse building activities. How do we do that? How do we get the kids to do it naturally? As opposed to, I love when you go into a classroom and they're doing group work, but none of them are talking to each other. Oh no, they were in groups. Yeah, but they weren't talking. So how do we do that? What are supports for that? They can be a classroom supporter. Work side by side with the teachers. That means you need to provide time for your coaches to actually get into the classrooms. Engages in modeling effective teaching strategies or co-teaching. Okay, modeling and co-teaching is huge because that's in the moment support. Observe teachers and provide meaningful feedback, and I have some resources that I'm going to be sharing later on that I think can assist with that. And participates in planning with the teacher. I think the planning is really important, particularly if there's going to be a lesson that the coach is going to be observing. Really getting the full effect from planning to delivery to reflection for that coach, because that's going to be able to see what areas the teacher needs the most support in. Oh. School leader, they would contribute to your school-wide reform initiatives. They are the people who want to make change for the positive in your school building. They advocate for initiatives and assist teachers in implementing reform. They do walk that fine line between administrator and teacher. but they are a teacher. And we need to make sure that everyone is aware of that. As an instructional coach, they're in that teaching realm. Because as soon as we put the administrative title on, they become an evaluator, and you undermine the coaching philosophy. They are also your catalyst for change. They're the people who might be the voice of challenging the principal. Well, this is not working. We need to come up with something. They commit to continuous improvements to meet clearly articulated goals. Many districts, notice I didn't say all, but many districts have a district improvement plan that filters down to a school improvement plan. They can be the people that help you get that school improvement plan off the ground. And utilizes observation and inquiry to encourage analysis, reflection, and appropriate change. And last but not least, your instructional coach needs to be a learner. They engage in personal continuous development. They attend professional learning opportunities. They network to solve problems of practice. They can model learning, and they are able to identify their own personal strengths and areas in need of improvement. They are typically your most reflective practitioners, are your coaches. Okay? So, just want to check one thing. Okay, so the next activity that I have is we have all these different roles, okay? And this is the part where we're going to kind of do a little bit of reflection coupled with a little bit of goal setting and action planning all at one time, okay? So what I've created is a little graph for you, and what I've envisioned in this activity is you're going to kind of make bars under current for each of these different roles that your coaches are servicing. How much of it is dedicated to that? So the taller the bar, the more of the time the coach is spending in that role. And then, based upon some of what we've discussed today and some of the learning, what would your goal be for the use of your instructional coaches? Which roles would you like them to be servicing the best? And then, how are you going to do that? What are some quick, or maybe not so quick, action steps that, as we're already in May, today's May 1st, right? So we're really thinking in terms of using this to build next year. What might be some things that you can commit to doing next year to start to make the shift in the roles of teachers? All of these roles are important, but the needs of your district or your school will determine the roles that are most important. So I'll give you some time to think about that. Okay, if I can bring us all back together. So again, the intent of this activity was to reflect on where we are and where we can go to make the use of our coaches more effective. Because the reality of the situation is that the coaches are always the first one up on the chopping block when there's budget cuts. So you need to be able to make sure that your coaches are effective so you can defend those positions to your Board of Education. And if you are using their primary role as a resource provider, that's not going to be the most effective use of their time. It's a piece of it, and an important one, but that shouldn't be all they're doing, okay? So now what we want to talk about is, now that we understand more about what coaching is, how do we implement this in our structures of our school? So again, the goal of coaching is that teacher practices lead to student achievement. Because this goes all the way back to today's presentation in the beginning, where we talked about the number one indicator of student achievement is teacher effectiveness. So this is, notice there's really no starting point here. You could kind of pick wherever you want to start. We are actually going to start at assess. Now, in the hot off the presses, what you have is a walkthrough tool. Some of you have already seen this. Is a walkthrough tool that I created with a variety of different resources specifically for math. Most of our administrators don't have an opportunity to watch a full lesson, but many like to get in and get snapshots of classes. So I created this tool as a way for you to get snapshots. This is not designed to be evaluative. This is not designed to say I went in for 10 minutes and this teacher's really good or this teacher's really bad. What this is designed for is to think about trends that are happening either with certain teachers, at certain grade levels, maybe within your whole building. And based upon those trends that you're finding, develop your professional learning plan. This could be a very valuable tool for coaches if they are providing grade level support, if maybe that's all they have the capacity to do because of numbers. What are the biggest needs at that grade level? So that is a resource. So we need to figure out where our teachers are at. This also goes back to the idea that not all teachers need the same support. So you gather evidence from a variety of resources. The walkthrough tool is about the instruction of the teacher and the student's response to that. You also are going to look at assessment data. That could be your benchmark data in your district. That could be the Smarter Balanced assessment. Maybe it's IABs, whatever data your district relies upon. And if you start looking at that data and it's not giving you a picture, I would challenge you to think about whether you need that data. Reflect on that data. What is it really telling us? What's the big picture here? And what are the needs then that need to be addressed by identifying the strengths and weaknesses? We've got this down pretty well, it appears. Here we have some trouble. Okay? So for instance, in some of the walkthroughs that I've done recently, let's say maybe kids are, they're in groups together and they're working on grade level content, but there's no talking. They need help with discourse. So now that's a very concrete thing that your coaches can work with the teachers on. Once we've done that, we need to set goals. When we set goals, key, coach and teacher determine the goals. This is not the administrator setting the goals. This is not the coach telling the teacher what their goals should be. This is that collaborative piece. The coach and the teacher identify the time frame of how long we're going to work on this to see change. And then the coach is the one that thinks about what are the activities that align to that goal so that I can offer the appropriate supports for the teacher. Maybe depending upon the goal, it's, we'll use this idea of we want increased discourse. So maybe the teacher says, I'm going to go in and observe a class and I'm going to figure out how much student discourse I'm seeing. And then we're going to talk about some math routines that are evidence-based that promote discourse in students. And then I'm going to model that for you so that you can see what it looks like in practice. And then you're going to try it, and I'm going to watch again. And then maybe a couple weeks later, I'm going to go in again and see if we see increased discourse. Okay? So that's just like one example of how that process might look.
I have a question. So
Yep.
for the goals piece,
That wasn't a question.
I'm a part of setting some of those goals, okay? Because what I observe and what I see and where I feel a teacher needs some improvement, I do have that conversation with a coach, and they have that, and along with the teacher as well. So what should I be doing here? What's your suggestion? I can't change that. I'm just going to be honest. I can't
Yep.
change
No.
that.
So I would say that I would have I guess the way I would probably approach that, because you don't want that coach ever being put in that evaluative role. So what I would do is I would have the conversation with the teacher through that administrative lens,
Right.
saying, based upon what I'm seeing, I really think this needs to be something you're working on. I would recommend that you have that conversation with, whoever your coach is in the building. Why don't you two get together and think about a plan that would be able to implement that? So that way you've pulled the coach out of that initial uncomfortable position, and you've given the teacher control to say, I think this is a weakness, and hopefully you're having that conversation, do you think it's a weakness too? All of those like typical conversations, and then you bring in the coach later. That would be my recommendation.
Okay. All right.
So then we have to actually do the plan. In order to do the plan, you have to identify what are the instructional needs. Make sure everyone understands the student needs. The student needs in one classroom versus another classroom are going to be very, very different. Provide feedback on the lesson plans. I think more veteran teachers get away from lesson planning. They just jot down a couple little notes and we're good to go. But sometimes we all need to kind of take that step back and really think about what is our plan of instruction. And then support to create and adapt materials. Again, a textbook isn't the end-all be-all. And just because that worksheet was said to be done with this activity, maybe you need something different. But the teacher might, especially if they're a new teacher, they might not know what that is. So your coach, as the content and instructional expert, can come in and say, you know what, this is okay, but what if we looked at this? Do you see the differences with that and why this might be better? So you're getting the teacher to understand that as you go. Then, of course, you need to implement. And when you implement, you want to conduct some walkthroughs. I would observe full lessons. It is really difficult to figure out what's going on in a classroom when you're in for 10 minutes. It's near impossible. Engage in research-based teaching practices. I would recommend that you check out the evidence guide for mathematics that's posted on our website. Model lessons and provide feedback. So there was shared with me, this again is in your resource, this is in the implement piece. This is a draft of something that was sent to me from my colleague at the Vermont Department of Ed. And what she was doing was she took some information that was from the Effective Teaching Practices, NCTM, and Catalyzing Change, which just recently came out, more of a high school approach. And what she did is she created indicators that are proven to be effective for mathematics specific. I think it's really, really important anytime we observe to have a lens of which we are observing. And if a math coach, their lens should be the mathematics and the instruction of the mathematics. So this is a tool that talks about whereabouts are you. This might also go into the plan part, where maybe the teacher evaluates themselves, the coach goes in, evaluates the lesson, they work together and come up kind of really where are you and what might be our plan to move forward. And then once we implement, go back to this, know what's expected. Okay, so I thought this was a really nice resource, and I checked with my colleague and I said, oh, I have a workshop coming up, is it okay if I share it even though it's in draft form? And she said absolutely. So hopefully that'll be something that you'll find valuable moving forward. And then we need to reflect. How close are we getting towards our goal? If we go back to our discourse example, has discourse improved? Review the student achievement data. Has the discourse caused my students to perform better? And then adjust the plan and goals as needed. Your goal setting should always be a work in progress. We have at the agency strategies that we work on and have to report back to the commissioner on, and we are continually updating what we're doing with that based upon what the data is showing and where we're at. So it's a goal, but it's a moving target. It should be changing as you go because we can continually be improving. So now we're going to talk about seeing it in practice. This also, just to finalize the last resource, this you've seen, I think, in every one we've done. This is that instructional practice guide from Student Achievement Partners, geared specifically for coaching. Again, I'm not saying that I would do all of it at one time. Even the other one. Pick a piece of focus, perhaps is your goal. So we're going to watch a short video about coaching. And as you watch this video, some of the things we want to be thinking about is, are they coaching heavy or are they coaching light? So think about that sheet that we did. Do you feel that this was primarily student-centered coaching or teacher-centered coaching, and how do you know? And then how do you think, and it's pretty self-explanatory, the different parts of the cycle, how do you think those specific components benefited the teacher? So it's only like a 3-minute video to do all of that in. And then we're going to kind of, we'll do some sharing in small group, and then we'll do some full group share outs. So what do you think? Heavy or light? Well, if you want to pull out your sheet that you first started with heavy and light, what were some of the things that you saw or heard that indicates to you whether or not this coach was coaching heavy or light?
She was meeting with the teacher right before the lesson for 20 minutes. So it was like a short, quick, right before, like that.
And would that be indicative light or heavy? Heavy, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there was a beginning, a middle, and an end. I mean, it was talking about what's going to go on, then following through as a coach in the classroom to make sure things are happening as it was supposedly going to happen, and then having that post-conversation about kind of what worked, what didn't work, and some of those things that you can do to tighten it up moving forward, or things that she acknowledged about the teacher, or creating that push for her.
Good. What else?
There was specific feedback afterwards about the pace, about less teacher talk, about the onus being on the kids, and they were doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah, this wasn't a coach who was like, oh, you're doing a great job. It was like, okay, we know you need to slow down how quickly you talk. Like, that's what I'm going to be looking for. It's very directed. And then she, in that post, addressed that again. Good. What else?
I'm not sure if you'll be talking a little bit more about this in the next section, but as a coach, sitting with the teacher and taking a lot of notes like that and really kind of documenting what happened is a great tool, because it then can be a worksheet that you can work off of. But the trust level into where does that go, and is it going to be shared with the principal? Because although the coach was coaching in great ways, there was almost a crossing that line of evaluative that you have to be careful of. And I think that's...
So I think that's a responsibility of both the coach and the principal to set those structures in place so that the teachers really understand what that purpose is. And it is a matter of building that trust that I'm not going to email this on to the principal later, that I'm using this so that way once we get through the cycle, we're going to revisit this and see where we did, what went well, what didn't go well. I think that a lot of that just is with time, which is why if you can start the process with your teachers who are most ready and willing, and suddenly they're like, oh, that's not bad. Like, I really learned a lot, and the principal didn't come knocking on my door, kind of a thing, especially when something doesn't go well. I think that just is part of that whole culture around that. Sometimes, she was obviously taking notes on a computer, which everyone always worries about cyber, where did it go? Sometimes using more of a paper thing, and then giving it to the teacher, and say, you keep it, is a way to be able to take the notes, but then give them that ownership, like, hey, you have it. Bring it to our next meeting because we're going to review it, but it's yours to keep. I think those are some little strategies that you can do to handle those types of things and building that relationship. Anything else that you heard? She talked about attending the data team meetings. I don't know if anyone picked up on that. So again, as a coach, it's understanding the data, but it's more than that. It's about helping the teachers figure it out. And I think that the other piece that the principal brought up was the idea that because the coach is actually in the classroom and seeing it, right? We can all look at a student's paper and make assumptions about what we think went well or didn't go well, but actually witnessing the instruction is better evidence of that. So that is an idea of what the coaching cycle may look like. When we're thinking about this coaching cycle though, so in this particular instance, I met with the coach 20 minutes before I taught the lesson. Think of your own structures in your school. It's probably not feasible in many instances to do that. So as a principal, I think another difficulty of your task with supporting coaches is structuring the time so that the coaches do have the ability to meet regularly with teachers at important junctures of time. That's really hard to do. That may take a whole kind of overhaul. That's where, if you're fortunate enough where you have the ability to utilize other staff members to cover classes and things like that, it doesn't have to be a long meeting. We're not talking we're meeting for an hour. We're talking a little quick check-in at certain important moments in time. So that brings us to, how do you support your coaches? You want to communicate support for your coach. That is things that, again, making sure that the roles of the coaches are understood by all parties, the teachers and the administrator and the coach. Schedules collaborative time, we just talked about that. How can you build that into your schedule? Arrange staff development. Utilizing your coaches, if you're supporting them, you're giving them that leadership that they need. Lead study groups with your coaches. If there's a particular, sometimes schools will have a particular goal that's like a school-wide goal that permeates all disciplines. Lead the groups on that so that your coaches understand what the expectation is so that they can then support the teachers in carrying out that plan. Co-facilitate staff development. Okay, that helps build that trust piece a little bit. Learn about what the coach has to offer, particularly so there's different ways that coaches are handled. In some buildings, they're building level coaches and the principals kind of get to hire them, fire them, do whatever. In others, there's district level coaches where the principal's told, here's your coach. And you don't know who this person is, you don't know what they've come from, you don't know what their plan is. Have those conversations before they start the coaching cycle to get everyone on the same page. Make time to meet frequently with the coach. I think that administrators are so overwhelmed very often with regular day-to-day administrative tasks as well as completing the evaluations for all their teachers that sometimes they forget about meeting with the coaches. Because again, your coach is kind of your teacher leader, so in the back of your mind, you're like, hey, they got this. Well, you know what? They need to feel supported and know that if they are starting to struggle with something, that they can come to you and say, you know what, I'm really having trouble with this difficult conversation, or I'm not sure what to do about this situation. So you need to provide that time. Which means that the coach and principal relationship is key to success. The principal and the teacher, and when I'm saying teacher here, we're talking about the coach teacher, needs to be on the same page. They need to have a shared vision of the needs, and they need to have a shared vision about how we're going to improve the school. So, what I have for you is an activity, again. Now, some of you are here with a coach, which will make this particularly valuable. For those of you that are not here with a coach, it can be equally as valuable because it can get you to think about, what do you want to occur? So this is a partnership agreement map for student achievement, coach, and principal. So what roles do I take on? So as the principal, what is my role? As the coach, what is my role? How and when will we communicate? So this would be like, in end of August, early September. meeting with your coach, and let's set the foundation for what coaching looks like in our building. It says things, how will we implement in-class coaching? Are you as a principal going to give me the time to actually go in and do that in-class coaching? What is the time structures? So what I'd like for you to do right now is I'd like you to read through these and just jot down some notes and kind of, again, put your own rose-colored glasses on. And in the ideal world, what would I want this to look like in my building? And I'll give you some time to work on that. Okay, so as a result of doing this activity, my guess is that most of the coaches in the room realize that they have even more on their plate than they first bargained for. And many of the principals realize that they've put a lot more on their coach's plate than they realized. Yet there's still only so many hours in a given day. So that's the part that becomes difficult for us. Any other feedback about this activity or questions? All right, we are, yep. Oh.
Question, what does the instructional coaching team look like? That's the first I've heard.
The instructional coaching team.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're taught, the instructional coaching team is the coach. It could be a grade level team. It could be an individual teacher. The principal might be part of that. It would vary depending upon what we're doing. So the instruction, when we think of instructional coaching, again, we're talking about an on-site PD provider to support teachers. So what is your team that's in place to support teachers? So that could be it could be the principal, the instructional coach, and a teacher. If we're talking about providing instructional supports at a specific grade level, maybe it's that grade level team with the instructional coach. Maybe the principal doesn't need to be part of that team or whatever. Maybe you have an assistant principal that takes on that role. Maybe you have the interventionist in because they're helping identify the areas that they're repeatedly seeing as problems to identify if it has to be something that the teacher is doing. So I don't think there's any set structure to that.
Oh, okay.
It varies.
I've heard
Yep.
that term.
Yep.
The question about how will we handle conflict, staff that are unhappy with the program. So if you're in a district where the math supervisor for the district regularly meets with their coaches, regularly meets with the teachers, and the supervisor assigns the coach to assist the teachers. And then you have one teacher who is just ignores any and everything anybody says. Just does not receive because they don't think that they're doing anything wrong. Everything they do is right, and it's the children, it's all of these things. That particular conflict, does that responsibility to attempt to mitigate that fall on the district supervisor, the principal, or both?
I would say both. Because I think anytime there's a conflict within a building, I think the principal needs to be involved because hopefully the principal has the relationships with all the people involved. Since the supervisor was the one who assigned the coach, I think they need to be brought into the conversation as well. Because, let's face it, this is a pretty significant relationship between a coach and a teacher. Maybe there's a personality conflict that's just not working. Maybe it's a veteran teacher with a very young coach. How do they possibly know more than I do? I've been teaching for 30 years. They've been out of the class, they've been teaching for 10. So those types of root causes of what the conflict is, if it ends up being a teacher who truly is just resistant to, I am perfect, I need no help, that definitely is an administrative job. And that goes back to the idea that, not that you want to give up on that teacher, but I would give up on the coaching of that teacher. I think that the role would then shift to more of that administrative role because the coach isn't going to be effective. So you're just utilizing the minutes in the day with this coach for a teacher who's non-responsive. So unfortunately, there are some teachers out there that the only way to get them to be responsive is to make an administrative issue, which would fall on the principal. Good question. Other questions? Okay, so we have, we'll finish a little bit early, not too early, but a little bit. What we've done today is I hopefully have given you an opportunity to understand what the coaching can look like, the different roles coaches take on, how as an administrator you have the responsibility of not only supporting your teachers, but also your coaches. And ultimately, how you respond as an administrator is going to affect the impact of coaches in your building. And if you can positively impact coaches, you can positively impact teachers, which means you will positively impact students. It's a domino effect. So what I'd like for you to do is I have copied an article for you from Learning Forward, and it's Principals Boost Coaching Impact. And as you read through this, it's a summary, I think, in a lot of ways of the learning that occurred throughout today's lesson. Once you do that, I want you to do a coaching self-assessment. And what this is what are the systems and supports that you have in your school now or in your district now that support coaches, or what do you need? Same thing with implementation. Where are we at in this process? What are some strengths about the coaching in the building? What are areas for improvement? And then I've also provided some opportunity for you to do some short and long-term planning with some action steps. So this is that like, where are we at, where are we going piece. And then as you finish that activity, we'll come together again. I have a few more resources to share with you, but please don't forget, just like all the other sessions, I do have an evaluation form. I read every single one, so please take the time to provide me with any feedback that you may have. So I will be quiet now for a while so you can read and start to think about what today's learning can do, particularly as we springboard into the next school year and planning for coaching next year. Your use of coaches, what were some of the things that resonated with you throughout today's workshop?
The need for coaches.
The need for coaches. Okay, some districts are here going, we don't have this, how do we get it?
I am fortunate because I have coaches. I just think really being more intentional in sitting and planning and reflecting on what we're doing and if it's working. In the day-to-day operations, that doesn't always happen. So I'm definitely going to use that planning piece and this reflection pieces with the coaches in
Great.
for next school year.
Yeah, I think that's if you're right, if you're fortunate enough to have coaches, being very intentional about their purpose and the use to be most impactful.
I think as a high school administrator without any instructional coaches, looking at the pieces that I've been able to take on, but then really thinking about how I can delegate some of this, knowing that we don't have the coaches, and how that managing those pieces, knowing the importance of it, and how there does need to be a delineation between my role and what that role would be.
Right. So if we don't have coaches, how might we be able to restructure some of the staff that we do have to at least facilitate some of the roles that would normally be under that role of a coach, to still be able to support teachers to improve their practice, which ultimately will improve student learning. Good. So again, those of you that were here, you checked in, you will get the presentation and all of the materials will be sent to you probably by the end of the day today, if not certainly by the end of the day tomorrow. The Center for the Collaborative Classroom, Learning Forward, and ASCD all have some really good information about instructional coaching. Learning Forward is probably one of the premier instructional coaching foundations. Some of their stuff, it's kind of ironic. It seems dated when you look at copyright and stuff, but it's still very relevant to what we're doing today. So again, I thank you for your time today. I know it's difficult, particularly we're in testing season now. My middle son is taking the NGSS test today. Are there any last minute questions that I can answer for you? Okay. Okay, here is my contact information. Again, please reach out. Anything that I can do to support you in your roles as administrators to support math education in your buildings, please reach out to me. You know, I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Please fill out your evaluation forms. You can throw them up here on the desk. And again, thank you for your time. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.